Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The wind howled like a keening wraith as Clara pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, the wool scratchy against her skin. She had never felt cold like this, the kind that seeped deep into her bones, curling around her heart and squeezing. It was early December, and a blanket of snow covered Whiteley, her hometown, transforming its familiarity into a monochromatic world of blurred boundaries and shadows. Tall pines loomed like specters, their branches heavy with frost, encasing the streets in an unsettling silence. Clara's heart raced as she passed her childhood home, now a sentinel of memory, its windows dark and uninviting, like the eyes of an indifferent watcher. The story of the abandoned Whiteley Asylum had been the talk of the town since the first heavy snow fell. Built in the 1920s, it had once been a refuge for the unwell, a scandal-ridden institution that housed those deemed unfit for society. Reports of strange sounds emanating from its crumbling walls intrigued and terrified the townsfolk. Incidents spoke of shadows flickering in the windows at night, of whispers echoing through the frost-bitten air. Clara had long been fascinated and repelled by its monstrous beauty. But today, a restless urge compelled her feet forward, drawing her closer to the forgotten past. The path to the asylum was treacherous underfoot, a trepid battleground of slick ice and unyielding snow. As she approached the looming edifice, every creak of a branch and rustle of leaves set her nerves on edge. Clara's breath condensed in the air, mingling with the scent of decaying wood and damp earth. The imposing structure emerged from the veil of white like a malevolent ghost, its windows gaping like mouths craving the warmth of souls, its roof sagging under the weight of years and neglect. Each step closer felt like crossing a threshold into a realm of dread. With a final burst of determination, Clara pushed open the heavy front door, which swung inward with an ominous creak. The air inside was stale, laced with rot and the faintest hint of something sweet and decayed. Dust particles danced lazily in her flashlight beam, swirling around her like lost spirits. Her pulse quickened, a tattoo of fear pounding against her rib cage as she crossed the threshold into that dark hollow. The remnants of memories lay scattered across the floor, overturned chairs, torn files, and remnants of lives long abandoned, whispered secrets she could barely grasp. As Clara ventured deeper, the silence swelled around her, heavy and oppressive. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, taunting her with the promise of movement. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if they too were alive, holding their own ancient fears and sorrows. A chill ran down her spine, yet she pressed on, each heartbeat resonating with the allure of what might be found. Voices of the restless surged through her mind, tempting her to uncover the truth. They muttered of trapped souls, of lingering regrets, and Clara felt the grip of their despair tightening around her. In the depths of the asylum's decaying wings, she stumbled upon a room filled with rusting medical equipment, a testament to the madness that had once thrived within these walls. The scent of disinfectant, now mixed with time's decay, clawed at her senses. On one wall, peeling paint revealed strange symbols and sigils, as if someone had etched warnings into the very fabric of the asylum. Tension drew tight within her chest as she traced a finger over the markings, an unease creeping up her spine. The atmosphere thickened, wrapping around her as she turned to leave, but a sound made her freeze. A distant whisper that seemed to beckon her. The whispers grew, Louder now, a cacophony of despair. She raced through the dimly lit corridors, heart thundering as she fought against the tide of sound. Each footstep echoed through the decaying halls, and shadows danced just out of reach. It was as though the asylum itself was a living entity, pressing down upon her, feeding off her burgeoning fear. She stumbled into what appeared to be a common room, its walls stained with years of desperation. And there in the center stood a figure. It was shrouded in darkness, a silhouette that felt disturbingly familiar yet twisted, almost as if it were a mirror reflecting her deepest fears. Panic surged within her, the shadows now morphing into grotesque phantoms that clawed at her mind. Clara turned to flee again, but the very air shimmered, blurring her vision, and she became trapped in a nightmarish loop of the asylum's history. Every exit seemed to lead her back to that figure, which whispered her name, each repetition gnawing at her sanity. The walls pulsed, and the whispers gelled into distorted echoes of her life, recounting moments she had buried, failures she could not escape. No longer was she just Clara. She was trapped in a collage of agony, a living testament to the despair that had once filled this place. In a moment of sheer desperation, Clara cried out, a piercing sound that echoed through the empty halls. The figure shifted, revealing an emaciated face that twisted with sorrow and recognition. Suddenly, all the torment faced and forgotten wrapped around her like a vice. It was an aberration reflecting her own past suffering, failure, and regrets, the darkest parts of herself made manifest. The air thickened, and an overwhelming darkness folded over her, dragging her into a suffocating abyss. Clara's world shattered around her, trapping her in an eternal dance with her tormentor. Thoughts swirled like leaves caught in a tempest, shifting between memories of laughter and the faint echoes of her own screams. The asylum's walls trembled as if they too were alive, relishing her despair. In those agonizing moments, Clara understood that she was not merely a visitor. She was part of this decaying history, the culmination of all the anguish that had once filled its oppressive halls. When she finally emerged from the asylum, stumbling into the snowy night, she was forever changed. The wind clawed at her face, but the chill felt different now, as if the very air vibrated with the weight of what she had uncovered. Breathing heavily, she turned back to gaze at the asylum in the distance, its silhouette now distorted against the moonlight. Shadows flickered behind the cracked windows, and Clara realized that the whispers had not faded. They had merged with her own thoughts. She walked into the night, feeling the rawness of the cold sap against her skin, the whispers weaving into her consciousness, infusing her with a new purpose, to share the stories of the lost, yet knowing a deeper truth, that some horrors are meant to remain hidden. As she faded into the darkness, the asylum loomed larger, its shadows reaching out for her, promising that she would never truly leave, that its history had entwined eternally with her soul. The fog rolled in thick like a shroud, dampening the sounds of the sleepy coastal town of Black Hollow. Eleanor paced along the boardwalk, her heart racing as she ran her fingers over the jagged edges of decaying wood. The scent of salt lingered, heavy in the air, mixing uncomfortably with something sweet and decayed. She had returned on the anniversary of her mother's disappearance. The day shadows stretched long and whispered secrets between the cracks of time. Today, though, the usually bustling town felt suffocating in its stillness, a hushed anticipation that made the hair on the back of her neck stand tall. Eleanor had always prided herself on her practicality, a trait that had served her well as a hospital nurse for nearly a decade. Yet as she stepped further along the desolate boardwalk, each creak beneath her feet seemed to echo the doubts in her mind. Why had she come back? The ghosts of her childhood haunted every corner, her mother's laughter now a distant memory, drowned out by the ocean's relentless crash. Last night the dreams returned, vivid and unsettling, drenched in the fog of her childhood fears. Tonight, she felt aware of something lurking just beyond her periphery, its eyes watching from the fog. The ramshackle houses that lined the shore were time-worn, paint peeling like the layers of memories she tried desperately to bury. In her memories, they seemed alive, vibrant with laughter and warmth. Yet now they stood lifeless, their windows like blank eyes staring into nothingness. She hiked up the path leading to the old lighthouse that jutted out against the gray sky, a solitary reminder of a past that felt as if it were pulling her toward a dark discovery. It loomed, jagged and unmistakable, a beacon for shadows long, lost to the tide. Reaching the lighthouse, the door groaned in protest as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and the scent of rust, a muffled testament to years of neglect. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, her instincts screaming for her to turn back, but a strange compulsion drove her deeper into the gloom. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, teasing her sanity, and the hairs on her arms prickled as if a presence had moved just beside her. Every sense was heightened, and she could taste the metallic tang of fear on the back of her tongue. Drawn to the staircase spiraling upwards, she climbed cautiously, each step a reluctant embrace of the past. Memories flickered like shadows in her mind. A mother's embrace, the summer afternoon spent fishing, laughter ringing out, then echoed silence. Eleanor reached the top where the lantern room provided a panoramic view of the shore, the ocean, stirring with an unsettling intensity as if calling out to her. Was she meant to be here? The air felt cooler up high, as if the chill was a reprimand for intruding on forgotten secrets. Looking out towards the water, a fleeting figure caught her eye. Her heart thundered as she squinted into the fog, searching for some sign of movement. But all that met her was the crashing surf. Despair thickened in her throat at the thought of what she might find. Fragments of stories forgotten washed over her. Whispers of long-lost fishermen, sacrifices made, and warnings etched in warnings along the shore. Had her mother been a part of this? Those stories began to morph, twisting into a chilling narrative that left her breathless with dread. In a frenzy, she turned back towards the staircase when a soft tap echoed within the lighthouse, halting her steps. It came again, gentle yet urgent. Something inside pushed her forward. A whispering dread drew her to a dusty closed door nestled deep within the walls of the lighthouse. The handle felt icy in her grasp, and with a breath that echoed her fear, she turned it. The door groaned open, revealing a small forgotten room filled with the remnants of an unholy obsession. Maps, journals scribbled with frantic ink, and photographs of missing townspeople, all leading to one chilling conclusion that mirrored her own family. With every page she turned, the creeping realization of her mother's fate consumed her. Her voice, once so familiar in her dreams, now echoed within the void of this crumbling sanctum. The last entry sent chills down her spine. They come at dusk, the sacrificed shadows that linger between the tide. I must go back. The whispers call to me. Eleanor reeled, clutching her head as the walls closed in. Was her mother still alive, held by the very horrors she had tried to escape? Suddenly, a sharp crack reverberated through the foundation of the lighthouse. The structure groaned ominously and hot breath escaped her lips. The lighthouse wasn't merely a monument to her childhood. It was a prison built upon untold horrors and deep, inescapable truths. An intoxicating dread overwhelmed her senses as the tapping grew louder, a chorus of frantic knocks that pulsed like a drum, summoning her towards the door she had come through. Shadows surged, shifting grotesquely across the walls, no longer mere figments of her imagination. They whispered her name, and with a mounting horror, Eleanor felt her body turn on its own accord. She was drawn back to the window, a siren call from the depths of the water. Beneath the frigid waves, a swirling mass of dark shapes beckoned, their twisted forms writhing in a grotesque dance beneath the surface. The ocean churned violently, threatening to swallow her whole. Amidst the chaos, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace. A fragmented memory returned of her mother's laughter, mingling with the crashing waves, the promise of a reunion that felt imminent. Finger trembling, she pressed it against the glass, the coldness zapping her spirit back to the moment, leaving a chilling realization tethered in fear. She recognized those shapes now. They weren't separate from her. They weren't foreign. They were reflections of what she had suppressed, shadows of family bonds that dug deep into her roots. To understand her mother's disappearance, she must embrace the darkness that lay within her. As the lighthouse shuddered, Eleanor was thrust backward, sent tumbling through the door she had opened. The walls seemed to breathe and shift, the stones aching from her touch as they turned slick with wetness, bleeding shadows in a dark embrace. For every flicker of clarity she grasped, 10 more twisted down into murky depths. What she found no longer mattered. Only what she was losing mattered. The unraveling thread of her own humanity. Flashes of the past burned through her mind. Her mother's face, the glow in her eye when she spoke of the ocean, the sacrifices made to be a part of it. The lighthouse was crashing, the storm outside tearing at the foundations. With one last scream of rage directed at nothing, Eleanor realized there was no escape, only acceptance. As the turbulent waves roared and shattered the last semblance of light, she felt the familiar taste of salt entwine with her blood. When the townspeople gathered the next day, a thick fog hung heavy, concealing secrets that depth would never allow to rise. Only the lighthouse remained, a solitary sentinel over the ocean, where the whispers of lost souls echoed against the tide, binding Eleanor to a fate more complex than death. Those who thought they knew the story of a mother lost to the sea now stood watch as the fog thickened, unaware of the shadow that had taken her place, waiting just beneath the surface of dark waters, whispering promises of return and sacrifice. The waves softly lapped against the shore, a reminder that, in Black Hollow, haunting memories never truly fade. They merely drown, waiting to call home their children once more. The first rain of autumn arrived like a harbinger, drenching the brittle leaves and washing away the last remnants of summer. As the skies darkened, Claire tightened her scarf around her neck, her breath visible in the chill. An unsettling dread clung to her heart like the damp mist rising from the forest, just beyond the edge of her suburban town. Each evening she saw shadows lurking beneath the trees, shivers crawling up her spine as she hurried past the pines. She didn't know why they felt so menacing, why the whispering wind carried a distinct warning. Her life had been challenging, ever since she lost her father 2 years prior. Claire had employed every coping mechanism, but grief turns love into an aching hollow, a void that churned deep within her. With her mother often retreating into a wall of silence, Claire found herself increasingly isolated. Retreating into her art, she painted wild landscapes and surreal figures, hoping to exorcise her demons onto canvas. But each stroke seemed to deepen her sense of alienation, threading her identity with a haunting fixation on the natural world around her, especially the forest that loomed just beyond her backyard. On a particularly oppressive night, after hours of grappling with a half-finished piece, Claire noticed something unusual. A thick fog began to crawl through the trees, swirling like tendrils of smoke. She felt an inexplicable tug of curiosity. The neon lights of her small studio flickered in the sudden gust, urging her to step outside. Stepping into the cool night air, she felt the weight of the fog pressing against her skin, as if it held secrets meant only for her. The forest twisted with shadows, gnarled branches reaching toward her like skeletal fingers longing for warmth. After a long moment's hesitation, Claire picked up her flashlight and ventured deeper into the woods. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating patches of moss, ancient trees standing guard against a lurking presence. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the distant trickle of water. Each step felt heavy with unseen eyes watching her, curiosity wringing her courage like a dish rag. When she stumbled upon a clearing, a strange sight met her gaze. An old, forgotten cabin, half sunken into the earth, the door yawning wide in silent invitation. Inside, she found the air dense with mildew and decay. Dust motes danced in her flashlight beam, speckling the darkness. The floor creaked beneath her weight, each groan echoing opportunity or threat. She discovered remnants of someone's life, cracked picture frames, a weathered chair, and piles of yellowed newspapers charting a timeline of forgotten tragedies. Among them was an article that made her stomach churn. Reports of missing persons stretching back decades, all originating from her small town. Heart racing, Claire's instinct urged her to flee, but an unsettling compulsion drew her toward the back room. Past the threshold, a descent awaited. The stairs spiraled down into darkness like the very maw of hell. Containing an urgency she couldn't comprehend, Claire descended, the air growing colder, denser. She shared that uncertainty with each step, but the anticipation was intoxicating. At the bottom, she discovered a vast underground chamber, the walls slick with moisture and streaks of something dark and unknown. The pounding of her heart mingled with a low hum emanating from an altar at the center, draped in what appeared to be tattered cloth, illuminated by eerie luminescence. A flicker of recognition washed over her. The symbols carved into the stone were the same marks her father had hunted in his amateur anthropology, signs of ancient faith that called for sacrifice. Panic gnawed at her insides as Claire stepped closer to examine them, and that's when she understood. These weren't mere markings. They were warnings, reminders of promises made and blood spilled. As dread clawed at her throat, she realized she was not alone. A whisper lingered at the edge of her hearing, a cacophony of voices beckoning from the walls, weaving tales of the lost and the damned. Terror met clarity when Claire understood the connection. Memories of her childhood replayed in haunting flashes. Her father's late-night research, frantic discussions laced with urgency, the opening of forbidden books shrouded in sorrow. She returned to that unbearable void, one she thought she had, pushed far back in the recesses of her mind, the belief that he was looking for someone, something. It dawned on her in a jolt of realization, a bolt of icy terror. Had he searched for her? With the enveloping shadows inching closer, a surge of adrenaline propelled Claire back up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, the swirling fog pressing against her like a suffocating shroud. She imagined unseen hands grasping at her ankles, holding her captive in the depths of that dread-laden chamber. Fighting the instinct to scream, she burst through the door of the cabin, stumbling into the night where the fog had thickened, engulfing everything in a veil of gray. As she navigated the suffocating mist, she felt something. A pull, a dread, awareness enhancing every shadow, every whisper of wind igniting her anxiety. The forest opened its mouth to swallow her whole, each tree morphing into grotesque shapes as she recognized their figure. Lost souls drawn to the dark, forever entwined with the forest's roots. They were her father's warnings come to life, emerging from those very pages of his research that had once seemed so benign. As she turned, panting, she caught a glimpse of something. A figure at the edge of her vision pacing silently behind her. In sheer desperation, she charged toward the town's edge, corruption wreathing her every thought. She reached her home, but the door felt foreign, as if the tangible familiarity had become a part of the otherworldly fog. With trembling hands, she fumbled with the lock. Eventually, it gave way, and she collapsed onto the worn floorboard, panting against the familiar scent of her own sanctuary. Yet the quiet felt false, uneasy, each creak echoing as though something continued to claw at the door, waiting, taunting. Dread seeped into her soul. Memories twisted and distorted like her father's face, as his helplessness drove him into madness. In that chilling moment, Claire realized that the entity haunting the forest had followed her home, interlacing itself with her, binding her to the fate of the missing. The whispers returned, more insistent now, echoing coldly through her veins. She could feel it tightening around her throat, drawing nearer, closer, revealing the truth. Sacrifice is never forgotten, and the forest always claims its due. The fog swallowed the quiet yet again, as Claire understood that she had not just unearthed the haunting of her world, she had become an integral part of it. As she raised her head, gazing into the mirror, across the room her reflection warped. It wasn't just her own eyes staring back. They were filled with shadows that thrummed with the past. In that instant, the forest's weight settled on her like a shroud, and the screams echoed through her mind, suffocating yet electrifying, an incomprehensible truth locked in a ghastly embrace. The forest would never let her go. In the fading light of a late autumn afternoon, the whispers began to leak through the cracks of the old Granger house, each one beckoning Sarah to come closer, to listen. The house had always held an uncomfortable fascination for her, a portentous hulk at the end of a street that had forgotten it existed. She had inherited it from her grandmother, who had filled her childhood with tales of the shadows that crept through the hallways and the eyes that watched from the corners of the rooms. However, now that she was here, the warnings faded to a dull thrum, obscured by the exhilaration of her new ownership and the smell of aged wood mingling with a faint whisper of decay. Stepping across the threshold, the wooden floor creaked beneath Sarah's weight, a groan as if the house acknowledged her presence and disapproved. Dust motes wove through the beams of light trickling from grimy windows, giving the impression of a long-abandoned sanctuary, rather than a place waiting to be filled with life. She had planned to renovate it, to breathe life back into the walls that had cradled generations, but each step deeper into its heart filled her with an inexplicable unease, like crossing into a memory that was not her own. As evening settled like a shroud, the air within the house grew heavier, thick with moisture and the musty scent of neglect. A cold draft slithered through the halls, rustling papers on the desk in the parlor. It smelled of damp earth and something more elusive, something acrid that seemed to sting the back of her throat. Discarding the oppressive atmosphere, she turned her attention to a half-open door at the end of the corridor, drawn by a compulsion she could not name. Inside, the room was cloaked in shadows, the wallpaper peeling and mottled, as if time itself had worn it down, revealing the bones of the house beneath. In the corner stood her grandmother's old rocking chair, swaying slowly, as if stirred by some unseen force. Heart-pounding, she approached it, hand extended, and as her fingertips brushed the surface, she felt a jolt of cold energy shoot through her. It was fleeting but unmistakable. A shiver raced down her spine and her breath quickened as she pulled back, heart racing in the stillness that followed. She turned to leave but paused when she heard it. the faintest echo of laughter soft as a child's just behind her. The darkness spilled from the corners of the room, pooling at her feet as she retreated into the hallway. A sense of wrongness crawling through her mind. Each room she passed bore remnants of a life lived, a child's toy, a faded photograph, but now they felt like remnants of a haunting. She could swear the air had thickened, becoming a thing of palpable dread as if it could reach out to ensnare her in its grip. Desperate to dispel the sensation, she grabbed her phone, its screen illuminating the corridor. Yet the shadows seemed to dance away from the light, retreating into deeper recesses. Wandering back to the parlor, Sarah found solace in the familiar, surroundings of furniture still draped in sheets, emblematic of her grandmother's eternal presence and anchored by the thick scent of polished wood. She decided to call for help with the renovations, thinking it a petty emotion to be afraid of mere shadows, yet, for the first time she felt alone, her worlds merging into the strange and unsettling. It wasn't just the house. Her entire life had spiraled into a void after her grandmother's death. And now, in the house that had once echoed with laughter, silence boiled over with an oppressive weight. As night descended, the once welcoming environment morphed into a labyrinth of unease. The curtains fluttered, beckoned by a draft that had no earthly origin, and every so often she could hear soft murmurs, low and melodic, intertwining with the wind. Goosebumps rippled down her arms as she paced restlessly, her mind edge-frayed, whispers slipping from the edge of comprehension. The feeling that she was not alone grew pronounced, becoming a living pulse, harmonizing with her heartbeat. Dread deepened the more she explored, each corner of the house sapping her courage. The laughter morphed into cries, echoes of something lost, reverberating through the walls like a warning. She stumbled backward when the rocking chair began to sway more violently, as if possessed by a force yearning for her attention. Shadows spiraled around her, wrapping her in the dark, and she could almost hear something straining to break free, something that called out for recognition. Determined to reclaim her sanity, Sarah gathered herself and returned to the kitchen, hoping mundane chores could restore her peace of mind. Yet as she opened the pantry door, the scent of rancid memories assailed her senses. Darkness festered in the corners, creeping toward her like ink spreading across paper, defying the promise of dawn. In that moment, a sense of urgency gripped her as the laughter transformed into cries layered with grief, sending her heart into a panicked race. She ran through the rooms, searching for the sources of the entreating voices as they grew louder, swirling around her like a tempest filled with remorse and sorrow. The house was crying for something to surface, something buried deep in its foundation tied to her bloodline. She felt a sudden chill and instinctively turned to the mirror in the hallway, noticing the sheen of moisture swirling over the surface. There, behind her reflection, stood a child, faint but unmistakable, their face smeared with tears and a hollow expression, reaching out with a hand that fragmented into shadows. She gasped and stumbled back, her heart slamming against her ribs. Paralyzed by the revelation, the past was alive in this house, restless and tormented. A continuum of despair pooled in the basement beneath the surface. She needed to leave, but her legs felt heavy, weighted by the history she could not escape. The child's face burned into her mind, carved from memory and grief, a harbinger of secrets that had long since been forgotten. Searching for the exit, she dashed toward the front door, but it swung shut and locked, as if the house itself refused to let her escape. Panic surged, turning her resolve into raw fear. The shadows thickened, coiling around her, whispering truths she was not ready to face. With each second, another layer of the house chipped away, revealing the depths of her family's darkness, tangled with loss and regret. Fingers trembling, Sarah flung herself against the door, desperation clawing at her throat. The voices crescendoed into a cacophony of grief, pleading and agonizing, vibrating through her very soul. Closing her eyes, she braced herself for the weight of their sorrow. When she opened them again, the children were before her, their pale figures stepping from the wall, faces twisted by a longing that mirrored her own, a need to bridge the past with the present. "Join us," they whispered in unison, their voices melting together in a tidal wave of yearning. She felt her consciousness slip as their chilled fingers reached for her, merging her with the house, binding her to the sorrow of generations. Surrounded by shadows, she realized the true horror of her fate. She would never escape, she would never leave. She was now part of the Granger house. The laughter transformed into cries, forever echoing within those cursed walls, trapped in the web of memory, lost to the creeping dread that resided there, a haunting that slumbered just beneath the surface, waiting for the next to listen.